Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Pre-Order Bonus. Once again, I'm here with you. It's Cameron Warren, and it's Jacob, the Game Boy Price. Jacob underscore Chip Dip 18. I don't know. How do you? Is there like slang for underscore? That's so lame. How about Jacob dash Chip Dip? Jacob the
Dash,
Chip Dip.
but Dash is something else.
Quick question for you, Jake. What does
Shoot.
the Chip Dip come from in your name?
Uh,
Is
I'm
that
gonna give us a short answer.
does that have some like hidden knowledge to it or hidden secret meaning?
It's an anagram for no. Chip dip does not come from a deep love of chip dip. Want to make that clear, okay?
It's fair
It
enough.
comes from the fact that my first username ever was Chipper154383. And after a few months, I hated it, and I wanted it something else. Honestly, picked Chip Dip because I liked the rhyme. It's not because of some fascination with chips or Chip Dip. And the 18 was because, of course, Chip Dip was taken, probably who deserves it and truly loves Chip Dip. Picked 18 because it was a number that I always had on my baseball jerseys.
That's cool. That's good to know that. Now we know. Chip dip. It is no reference to like onion dip or like ranch dip of any kind. It's
I mean,
just
dude, I love a good artichoke dip. Like those pita chips,
yep.
like pita chips and artichoke dip. I do love that. And yeah, that ranch stuff that you get. I don't know. It's
I've
got everything terrible under the sun in it. I enjoy it, but
I feel like we need a food podcast, Jake. Let's talk about food for a second. Favorite snacks. Oreos. Oreos and milk. You can't go wrong.
yeah, Oreos are definitely one of your favorites, right?
That hardcore Oreo fan, big time Oreo fan, all over that. Got the milk.
Hashtag Oreo sponsor us, please.
Oreo, if you need, I mean, if you need more people to buy your cookies, like this is the place where we're gonna advertise the crap out of those cookies. I'm gonna tell your listeners that they're the greatest cookies ever made. Listen, sound off, ladies and gentlemen, sound off in Discord if you disagree. What is the best? What is the best like grocery store dessert cookie or grocery store like dessert item? Is it Rocky Road? Is it Tillamook ice cream? Is it Oreos? Is it Chips Ahoy? Is it popsicles? Is it Klondike bars?
You want to hear the hot take of the night?
What's that?
Chewy cookies from Chips Ahoy are terrible.
Chips Ahoy are not very good. I think when you're a kid, like Chips Ahoy are like the forbidden fruit at the grocery store that your parents will never let you buy. But when you
Yeah.
actually eat them, you realize that they're just really bad, like stale cookies. But for some reason, your parents would never let you buy them. And so they hold this like mystique in your mind. You feel like you need to eat Chips Ahoy. We've gone way deep down a dark hole. Jake, let me tell you about a video game called Valheim. Have you heard of this game? We talked about it last week briefly.
So the episode is actually the episode of Dark Holes, which happens to rhyme with my current dark hole.
Don't talk about Dark Souls on this podcast. We're done with you.
Just so our listeners are aware, I keep bringing Dark Souls 3 in all of the group chat conversations that Cameron and I are in, and everyone's sick of it. I've become a monster.
You become the Dark Souls. You become one of those fans, the Dark Souls fans that are incredibly annoying. They tell everyone that nothing's better than Dark Souls. You're not a real gamer unless you beat every Dark Souls game like 6 times. Is that you
Which
now?
Almost. I've almost beat Dark Souls 3. I looked up where I was at, and I am like, let's see, like 2 or 3 bosses. That's not including optional bosses. I'm probably gonna go back to at least one of the optional bosses. We'll see. But Yeah, nearly done with the game. I'm like this close. This close
I
to
might
buying Dark Souls 1 remastered.
I might buy it just so I can tear it apart on this podcast. Just for content's sake.
Oh.
For content purposes, it's only $15 right now, as you keep telling me. So I think I'm gonna have to buy it. But let me just say real quick, Jake, Valheim.
Shoot.
I've just got one recommendation for people. If you're listening to the podcast, go on your computer, go to Steam, and buy Valheim and play it. That is all.
Simple as that.
Valheim is one of the most addicting video games I played in a long time. It's really freaking good, and that's all I'll say. Jake, you're gonna get your first toe dip tonight. Is that correct? Are you joining the crew, the Valheim Viking crew?
So I bought it. I logged it. Did as much as the tutorials I could in like 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Valheim hit 1 million downloads. Is that right?
2 million.
2 million.
Yeah, 2 million.
Dude, that studio just raked in so much cash, and I'm super happy for them. That is awesome.
Well deserved. Masterclass in game design. One of the best survival game loops I've ever played. We're gonna break this one down for you guys. Seriously, I wish we could break it down sooner or later, but there's a lot of content there. I mean, it's early access, and there's probably 100 hours of content.
That's what Gothalion said. Right?
Yeah,
he's put 100 hours into the game.
Yeah, 100 hours, and there's still like tons to explore, tons to discover and build, and all this stuff. I'll just say real quick, the reason the game works, and obviously we'll dive into this later, is because it's got actual objectives. There's 7 bosses that get progressively harder, and your goal is just to get strong enough to go fight these bosses. And I don't know why, it's just that simple addition just makes it work so well. So. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Jake, enough about that. Enough about Oreos. Enough about Valheim and Dark Souls. This episode, we're talking about a game called Call of the Sea, an Xbox exclusive. The first exclusive, I believe, of the year 2021, at least for Xbox, I think. Is that right?
Came out in December.
The first Series X exclusive, I think. Or Series X Optima, whatever.
I'm super surprised Xbox and Raw Fury, the publisher behind it, I can't remember if they created it out of their studio or not. Super surprised it didn't get way more press for that.
Yeah, it didn't get very much press. It's not, I mean, this is not a huge AAA game, but Jake, let's talk about it. Let's tell everybody how we're going to break down Call of the Sea.
Well, long-time listeners, you know how this is going to go. If you're a new listener, you've heard about Call of the Sea, you want to hear somebody's take on it, this is what we will do. We are going to talk about Call of the Sea in 4 different categories. The first category is narrative, and I imagine we're going to spend most of the episode in this category because this is a super narrative-heavy game. So much of this game revolves around the story and how that evolves and what happens, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be discussing that. Who's telling the story, why it's interesting, what we like. We'll talk a little bit more about writing, whether or not we like the writing, character development, those types of things, all going to be discussed in the first category. Second category is mechanics. So we're going to be talking much more about what you actually do in the game, how you progress, how you move the story along, what objects you interact with, how you interact with them, etc. Third category is gameplay loop. What's going to bring you back to this game? It's not a super long experience. I think I beat it in 5 hours or so. But what's going to make you stick around for 5 hours? We're going to talk about that in our third category. And then finally, impact on the industry. Call of the Sea. Like we said, it didn't get a ton of press. It got pretty good reviews, though. I looked at the reviews that got relatively positive. Did this make a splash? Are indie devs looking at this game? Who's looking at this game? Who's talking about this game and why? And who's not talking about this game and why? And we'll answer all those questions in the final category.
So Call of the Sea, I think it is a early 20th century, I believe 1930s, right, Jake? 1920s?
Yes, 30s.
So,
around then,
it's like
2030.
so it's like the Indiana Jones era is what I call it. So this is pre World War II, post Great Depression, like era of like I think. Sorry, don't quote me on that. I'm not a historian.
Indiana Jones era, I think, is a great descriptor for this type of game.
Yeah, Indiana Jones era, like world's kind of obsessed with exploration and discovery, and it's very much in that setting, right? You think Indiana Jones. This is a woman whose husband has gone to an island in, I believe, Polynesia. Is that correct? No,
Yeah, somewhere in the Pacific.
somewhere
It's
in the Pacific.
pretty vague.
Super vague. It's a fake, obviously a fake place. It's a video game, but so she goes after her husband, and it just kicks off, and it's a point and click adventure, and it's just you solving puzzles, figuring out where your husband ended up. You go to the island, you start having freaky dreams. There's some sci-fi stuff that goes down. I can't really talk about the narrative without spoiling the entire game because that's what this game is, right? This game is about experiencing a story and solving like some pretty dang complex puzzles. Like I'm not a good puzzle solver, to be honest with you. I have PTSD from fourth grade Miss Pasquarello brain teasers.
I'm laughing because I know who that is. None of our, well, actually, maybe a handful will know who that is, but I'm laughing. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I definitely have PTSD from that still, so that's not funny. No, it is. And yeah, you go solve puzzles, and you figure out what happened to her husband, and that's the narrative, and it's good. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. You play as Nora, and you're looking for your husband who's been gone for about a year. He has been looking for a cure for this rare skin disease that you have. For whatever reason, points him towards this, very nondescript island in the Pacific. And that's it, right? So you go follow the different campsites that he and his crew had made on the island. You gather lots of clues. You figure out things that are happening. This is very much the type of game where there's a lot of text, and thankfully, a lot of it's voice acting, and the voice actors do a great job, right? And so you'll read a letter or you'll see a photograph and you'll turn it around and somebody had scribbled something on the back, and so a lot going on here, and I think it's pretty cool because there's a lot going on. Like obviously you / Nora, you're discovering what happened to your husband and his crew, and there's a lot of sci-fi. It's like much more supernatural, I feel like, maybe. But it's not. I mean, it's sci-fi. Let's just keep it at that, right? And you discover all these really cool things that have been going on. Also, you discover the history of this island. So this island in the Pacific has, surrounding islands and populations who live in the Pacific. They stay away from this island. There's something weird about this island to them. And you discover this island's history and why it's weird and why people have a weird perception about it. So I think in terms of like narrative and story, there's a lot of depth here. You can't really escape it because you kind of have to everything, or at least I felt that way. When you get to go to each destination, you have to click on pretty much all the objects that you can click on, but you get a pretty rich story. And I love that it has different layers, right? 3 main layers: Nora and what she's experiencing, what you, the player, are experiencing. Nora's husband and her crew and what they were experiencing, and then the actual history of the people who inhabited the island. So there's a lot to dig in there. I think they did a really great job of creating like a really thick and cohesive story with depth, like a history with depth. I think that's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nice little touches here that I think are really cool. Some really nice detail like that invoke the setting and kind of what's happening, and then there's some subtle devices that they use, in the story and how that intertwines with the puzzles. I thought it was all really well done. I enjoyed the story. I was interested in I wanted to know what happened. Like the mystery was compelling enough for me to want to keep going and want to figure out like,
Hmm.
okay, what happened to her husband? Like, did he figure things out? Like, what's going on with her dreams? What's all this stuff that's going on? And I think the sci-fi element is like kicks it up a notch. I think they honestly like could have just gone like this is just straight Indiana Jones mystery. I don't even know that they needed the sci-fi, but the fact that they throw it in, I think just adds some layers and adds some complexity that fleshes out the game in a positive way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sort of, going along with what you're saying there, part of the story here, this gets really tricky, especially in the 21st century. If you are a team and you're making up like an indigenous population and you're just talking about their myths and cultural beliefs, how do you do that in a way that's not stereotyping what, indigenous people are like in the real world? And I think because they add a lot of depth to what's going on, and there's really no like white savior complex here. The white savior complex, for those who aren't familiar, it's a story about you have a group of a bunch of black or brown people. White dude comes in and saves everybody from their problems. Right? It's a trope. It's super boring at this point. Great anyway. Um, but this story avoids that, and that's something that I actually appreciated. When they talk about the history of the island and the indigenous people, it's on their own terms, right? So I thought that was kind of a cool thing that they did there. It for me, it just like really added a lot of depth to the people and everybody that they were discussing. And then Cameron, like you said, they could have just left it at that. They could have just like made this totally Indiana Jones archaeological dig and just kind of left it there. And Indiana Jones obviously gets into like religious themes, supernatural themes, etc. But they add something on top of this that makes it really compelling. That's much more science fiction, and so I think those layers in the story, it's like, okay, this is something really robust, and this is something you can really chew on.
Jake, let's talk about mechanics. I mean, I think this is a spiritual successor to like the Myst games. Did you ever play Myst back in the day?
Man, I played, I think, Myst and King's Quest. King's Quest.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, big King's Quest fan.
So, just really fast, my sister, my older sister, I growing up, I never considered her a gamer, but she was like phenomenal at Tetris and King's Quest. And I remembering back on this, she played a tons of the King's Quest games. I think they
Yeah.
had like 7 or 8 in the series. And I remember getting super frustrated and stuck. And but she was just phenomenal at games like this type of game where it's like super narrative heavy to explore a lot and the puzzles are
Yeah, I mean, I think the game's biggest downfall is two things. The biggest downsides of this game, I still think it's a game worth playing, worth checking out, because it's on Game Pass. If this game wasn't on Game Pass, honestly, I'd have a hard time recommending it if I'm honest. But because it's on Game Pass, it's like a different experience. I think for that reason. But anyways, I think its downfall is that those games like Full Throttle, Monkey Island, King's Quest, Myst, I think those games are better. I think they're just better. They're more well done than this. I think if this game wanted to really like rock the boat and kind of knock it out of the park in terms of making a splash in the industry and critically, it needed to do something different and better than those games have already done. Like those LucasArts adventure games that just, they're the creme de la creme of this type of experience. And then the other thing is the movement is absolutely terrible. It literally gave me vertigo. Like I don't know, like I think it's in 60 frames, but the movement, just make her move faster. Like just make the movement. I just wanted her to move like better. It's just weird. Like they made a first person game. It's not a point and click game. Like it's you move around like a first person shooter type of like you're in first person and you're walking, but it's so slow and clunky. The graphics like look beautiful and they have a lot of great. It's a fantastic art style that looks really really good, but the movement is just really bad. That took away from the experience for me like in a big way. I was actually really disappointed because I was into the story and like my wife was playing with me and was really into the puzzle mechanics and she enjoys that type of thing. But the movement was so bad that it was just hard to play.
I agree on the movement, and we're talking about mechanics. The point of this game is not movement, right? But because you have to move around to the inside the different destinations, inside some campsites, and you have to investigate a bunch of things, you can't avoid it. I mean, you have to do it. And I would say that I agree. And it wasn't even so much that because sprint mechanic, but it didn't feel like you were going that much faster. It just felt weird. I mean, you could change the sensitivity. There really were not that many settings when it came to the controls. I kind of wish that there may be a little more to help you with movement. I agree, though. Things felt a little weird. Even just like clicking on a ladder when you had to climb up something. There was a really slow animations looked a little clunky, and so I think it would. I agree with you, Cameron. I think in terms of movement, it would have gone a long way had they really, I don't know, like leaned into their animations a little more, leaned into the movement a little more. Panning the camera felt really weird. Something felt really off there. So yeah, movement not fantastic. Thankfully, it's not a big part of this game. Otherwise, it would be a massive problem for sure. Yeah, and then puzzles, Cameron. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, this game has tons of puzzles. Some of the puzzles were really fantastic. So the game has 6 chapters. The first few chapters, I thought there was really good pacing. Puzzles weren't necessarily super difficult. Didn't give you too many clues, but once you figured out the pattern, you figured out the puzzle, and it felt really great. I think it was chapter 3, like the difficulty spiked hard in the puzzle, really hard. And I played this game right when it came out, which was like I said, like December, right? So this game's like a month and a half, something like that. It spiked really hard. I got stuck for a long time. Game was barely out. Not a huge profile game. There were guides, and I found a few like let's plays, and it was funny because half of the time I'm just like watching the person be frustrated why I'm frustrated. Then they finally figure it out, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. And so this game, I needed a guide. As soon as I figured out like 20% of the pattern that I was missing, then I could do it. But I think it was chapter 3 or 4. The logic was very obtuse to this puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to talk about puzzles because I'm not a huge puzzle fan. Like, I like, Breath of the Wild puzzles, Tomb Raider puzzles are not, but it's because they're not that hard. Like, really, really hard puzzles, I'm just like, I'm too tired to think about this. Turn it off and put on Call of Duty or something. I don't have to think.
Right.
So that was hard for me. My Virginia, who's my wife, was playing, and she is really into puzzles and was actually really enjoying trying to solve them. But to your point on the difficulty, she's like really good at this stuff and like could not for the life of her solve. Even in the early chapters, you're probably smarter at these, Jay, because like even in the early chapters, we were really stumped. We just missed some obvious markers. And I think the game probably could have stood to do a little bit better job at showing you, hey, here's like the tools to go and solve these puzzles. Just a little bit better, like lean you into some of those mechanics. It's kind of like you think about Breath of the Wild, for example, just as a puzzle game. It's not really, it's more of an action game, right? But it's got all those little puzzles in it, and I think they work because you learn to use the same set of mechanics like over and over and over again. And I think this game could have stood, I think, maybe to lean in a little bit more to, hey, give me like a few different ways of how I should look for things or how I should discover clues in the environment. I feel like it didn't quite do enough for me to like point my eye or like point me in the direction of things that I needed to in order to solve the puzzles adequately, because there was things that we just missed that were obvious. You just had to look up or you had to do, and I don't know, that for me, like some of that is just like I'm not very good at puzzles. So if you're good at puzzles, you probably like that because you'd be like, oh, this is actually like a difficult puzzle. If you're not and you think of it more as like a game and there's game design that should like lead you to incrementally be able to like solve the puzzle, to me, I think the game has to do better. Instead of just throwing me at the puzzle, give me like some progression. Give me like a little bit of knowledge over time that helps me be able to solve it. So I feel super smart by the end of the game. This game kind of made you feel dumb in the very beginning.
Yeah, I think to me it feels like it was apparent that there was a very clear game design decision when it came to the puzzles. Like I said, the game's about 6 chapters long, and I feel like there was probably a meeting with all the devs, and they were trying to decide in each chapter, do we want a new set of logic for the puzzle, or do we want to have one set of logic for all of the puzzles that progressively gets more difficult? And I'm not entirely sure. Well, I think they went towards the way towards every chapter has its own logic,
Yeah.
which I think is not either of those game design philosophies. I think works right,
Yeah.
but you got to lean really hard into it. And if you're introducing a new logic, a new pattern that the player's supposed to figure out in every chapter, just because you're further in the game doesn't mean that you can give less hints about it. And so for me, I think it was maybe it was chapter 5 or 6 where I figured out the pattern. Like, for some reason, it wasn't nearly as difficult as one of the earlier ones. And I thought it was really well done. I won't give spoilers, but essentially it was using constellations. And there's this centerpiece, and you would do things with constellations. And I thought it was a super well done puzzle, right? So I think the studio here, and I need to look this up because I'm blanking on them, and I really want to commend them for this puzzle in particular. This constellation puzzle was really, really fantastic. But the experience with the puzzles was incredibly uneven. You had some chapters where it felt okay, some chapters where you just stumped and you couldn't find any thread to pull.
Let's talk about the gameplay loop, Jake. I think on this conversation of puzzles. So, as you mentioned, I think there's 6 chapters. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it is 6.
It's 6, and I think within each chapter there is a series of puzzles to solve. It may even be the same number. I think they get progressively harder, but you go chapter by chapter. You solve a series of puzzles that unlocks like the next area, and then you move forward, and that progresses the story. And that's really it. This is one of those games that's a very short experience. You go through it, you solve the puzzles one time, and you finish it, and that's it. I think there are some, if I'm not mistaken, there might be some secrets, like some Easter eggs, but this is truly, probably of all the games we've talked about, truly like a one and done experience. You go through it, you solve the puzzles, and that's it. Yeah,
Yeah, there's some collectibles. I think every level or every chapter has like a hidden.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So there are some things along those lines, but I mean, this game is kind of like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice in that the collectibles aren't so far out of what you're already doing because you're going to each section of a destination and you're clicking on everything anyway, that it's really not a stretch to just like 100% the game your first time playing through it. Things aren't too obvious or too, out of the way to do that. You might have to do a little bit of searching. And so for me, I like that. Like in a shorter experience, being like, hey, I could probably 100% this if I wanted to. That makes me spend a little more time in the game, appreciate it a little more. I think that's a good thing for sure. I was gonna say gameplay loop. I think I averaged about 40 minutes per chapter. Obviously, the one chapter that I'm thinking of where the puzzles really stumped me took me a lot longer. So if you're playing this game and you've got like an hour to play something, you could play this game easily for an hour, finish a chapter, feel like you've accomplished something, you progressed in the story, and then you just, move on. So I do like that, and I do think that contributes to something really cool when it comes to the gameplay loop. But I foresee a lot of people falling off pretty hard chapter 3. Just the puzzle was hard, right? And expecting that spike in difficulty.
Yeah,
so
I know it's kind of a sin in puzzle games, but just look it up. It's fine. Just do your best. If you can't figure it out, just look it up. I think it's fine. I mean, let me tell you about the biggest positives of this game. It's really short. It's got a like relatively intriguing story, and it's got some like semi decent puzzles to solve, and it's kind of a fun one to sit and play with a significant other or a friend. Just like sit down and kind of just go through it, right? Because it's so short.
Mhm.
So to me, like those are the draws of this game. Obviously, it's got a lot of issues and a lot of challenges, but if you just want a short and sweet, quick experience, solve some puzzles, experience like a cool little narrative, and see some nice like reflections and some nice looking graphics on the Series X, this is a nice little jaunt.
For sure. This game has some really, really stellar set pieces.
Yeah.
There are some the parts of the game that just looked incredible. This is one of those games that you could easily take screenshots all over the place in, right? Um, Man, I really don't want to spoil things. I'll just say music is a really big part of this game, and some of the set pieces they make around music are phenomenal, and it's so awesome to look at. So I think, yeah, playing with a significant other is definitely a cool way to go. I definitely called my wife in the room. I was like, "Listen, honey, this puzzle, please help me," and we'd work together for a little. Sure. So I think there's several ways of enjoying this game. I'm with you, Cameron. I think it's really best enjoyed with somebody else, and you both are trying to pick each other's brain and figure out how to get through this puzzle. Um, I think the thing that's going to keep you coming back in anything is a story. Like I said, it's not a slog to read all the journal entries. They're enjoyable, and shoot, I don't remember. Maybe I'll look this up too. But the voice actor who does Nora, I really grew to enjoy listening to her. So in
Yeah,
fact,
she's phenomenal. She's great.
yeah, I would just stop reading the text and I would just like the way that she portrayed Nora as a character. I thought was really well done. So big props to her. Uh, feel bad I can't. I have their site up right now. This is Out of the Blue, by the way. So this is the debut game from Out of the Blue.
That's right.
Um, yeah, that's what kept me back more than anything. Was like, man, I want to listen to Nora. I want to hear what she's doing and how she's getting through what's happening, or to her and to what happened to her husband. So that to me was the biggest draw coming back.
That's pretty impressive. That's their debut game, Jake. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I mean, Cameron and I, we've been kind of harsh when it comes to the puzzles, but I think for a debut game from a studio, they really did a great job.
Based out of Madrid. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Series X optimized game on Game Pass in your first game. I think that brings us,
Yeah.
Jake, into the impact on the industry. What do you think? I mean, to me, this is another, and I've mentioned this before on a couple other episodes, but this is
Mhm.
the type of experience that comes to the forefront because Game Pass exists. I think without Game Pass, this game struggles to get above the water. Not because it's a bad game, not because it doesn't look great. I think it would have like a niche audience that would really adore it and love it, but it would be just sitting on Steam on PC, and it would be kind of a hidden gem on Steam that just people just wouldn't see. And I think that's one of, again, we talked about this before. That's one of the amazing things about Game Pass, and that's their whole strategy is they go out and they find these independent studios. They find these like diamonds in the rough that are not, commonly played by everybody. And they're like, hey, why don't you make this for Game Pass? Like, come on Game Pass and we'll pump you up. And like now, because of that, like you can bet that Out of the Blue is probably working on something else and they're gonna make another game because they got that Game Pass money from Microsoft, right? And it was heavily premiered. It was like a huge trailer when in their like what was the event, Jake, when they did the Series X
Right.
set of
Over the
games?
summer. Over the summer, it was a really big one, wasn't it?
It was huge, yeah. And their first set of trailers for third-party games, this was heavily featured as like, this is our first Series X game, and it was like highlighted. None of that happens without Game Pass. I think that's the message out there to creators, to game creators, is like, you can make a game like this. You can make your passion project, and if you put your kind of creative heart and soul into it, you can get on Game Pass, and people will play it because it's on Game Pass. They won't have to think like, oh, I can only spend $20. Am I going to spend it on like Modern Warfare, like microtransactions, or am I going to like do the Game Pass monthly fee and like have all these games to play? I think Game Pass, it's fantastic. It's great.
Here we are yet again talking of Game Pass.
Game Pass
Yeah,
shills.
yeah, I think Call of the Sea in Cameron. I mean, you're saying this, so I'm kind of repeating what you're saying. Is another one of those indie games that's just like it's one of those gems that you find on Game Pass. You're just browsing through things that were recently added, just the library. You see Call of the Sea. It's got poster art that's really intriguing. You click on it, you watch a trailer. You're like, I'm gonna give this a try. And then next thing you, if you're not hung up on the difficulty spike in puzzles, you beat the game and you're like, oh, that was a good game. That was a good experience, right? So I absolutely agree in that way for sure. I in terms of like this genre of game, Cameron, you're right. I think it's a bit more of a niche demographic, but there's a core group of people who are really gonna love this game. And I'm really glad we have studios like Out of the Blue who are creating narrative puzzle based games like this. I like seeing that they're writing a lot of depth into their stories, into the history of what's happening in the world, right? They're doing a good job of building this world mythos, the legends that are happening here. So I think that's really well done. Also, we've talked about voice acting. Pulled up her name, Cissy Jones voices Nora. She was in Ghostbusters and Darksiders 3. So she did a fantastic job, and I think indie studios, if they take the risk to hire, I mean, it costs a lot more money, it's a lot more time, and it's a lot more production to hire voice actors. But I think here it's like, yeah, out of the blue, you took the risk and it paid off. You know, you had somebody who did a really fantastic job, and it enriches the game that much more for sure.
Yeah.
So I think other indie studios are going to be looking at Out of the Blue. They're going to be looking at Raw Fury, who published it, and they're going to be thinking, okay, I can make this type of game. There is a market for this game. There are publishers like Raw Fury who are interested in this type of game. I can do this, you know, put all the naysayers away. We can make this work. And so I think for indie studios, this is a hit. This is something that they'll be looking at for sure. For indie gamers, yeah, Cameron, I'm with you. I mean, if this game was 12 hours long, oh man, that would have been really hard. But the fact that it's like 5-6 hours, totally fantastic. I think it's a great length. I think there's definitely people who should be taking notes about how this game was structured for sure. And lastly, I'll say is that Out of the Blue, this is their debut game. And yeah, like Cameron and I've already said this, we have our criticisms, but they're on my radar now for sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to be looking forward to whatever they're doing right now, whatever they're working on right now.
Yeah, shout out to Out of Blue the Games for making a game like this, like a straight up puzzle game in 2021, right? Like and getting it on Game Pass. Good for them. That's awesome. Maybe we can get them on our new secret project, Jake. What do you think?
Man, I love to talk to them for sure. There's some interesting, and I mean interesting in a positive way, not like interesting, interesting game design choices. And it'd be really cool to sort of pick the brains why they did that, what their philosophy and thinking was behind all that.
Well, maybe we will reach out to them on Twitter or email. I think I see their contact right here. Jake, any other thoughts on Call of the Sea?
Very last thing I'll say.
Call to the Sea. Sorry.
Wait. Is it Call to the Sea?
Call to the Sea. Call of the Sea. Sorry. Yes.
I was going to say, we just spent 40 minutes calling this game by the wrong name.
By the way, 9 out of 10, just in case you're like put off by what we just said, 9 out of 10 on Steam, 9 out of 10 on IGN. So, but just try it out.
For sure. Yeah, very last thing I'll say is a repeat of something I said previously. There are some incredible set pieces, landscapes, sceneries in this game. And I really loved the sort of like cutscene moments. Like when you were first on a boat going towards the island is a really cool cinematic experience. And so like props to them for making a landscape, making this island something that's really good to look at.
Well, Jake, that is all the talk about Call of the Sea. This is a fantastic game for Game Pass. Get on your Xbox and get it downloaded. Try it out. Sit and play it with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your spouse, your friend. It's a fantastic one, and like Jake said, it's got beautiful set pieces. Shout out to Out of the Blue for creating an awesome game. Follow us on Twitter at Jacob_ChipDip18, and follow me at a new handle at MassGeneric, which is part of our new branding for our YouTube channel, Mass Generic Gaming. Check out the new logo, the new banner on the YouTube channel for Mass Generic Gaming. Follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm going to be doing all my game talk, talking about the podcast, posting, what we're talking about on each episode, announcing stuff, talking about video games in general, and, the odd crazy prediction, like the prediction that I just made right now, which is that Breath of the Wild will be announced for a surprise March release tomorrow.
Right. So listeners, this is the night before Nintendo's first
That's right.
Nintendo Direct in over like a year and over a year for sure, but I think like a year and a half, September 2019.
Mark my words.
I've been trying to come up with a list of predictions to post on our Twitter, and I can't think of anything that I want to say.
Breath of the Wild 2 next month. It's gonna happen. If it doesn't happen, Jake, I will buy you Taco Bell.
Okay, it's not. Yeah, I'm totally taking up that bet. And what I want to happen actually tomorrow is going to be something that will be a surprise to 0 people who have listened to the podcast. I want them to surprise release Eastward tomorrow.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. I'll take that bet. Who's going to win? Neither.
All right.
So if we both lose, it cancels out, and we just get our own Taco Bell. How about that?
Deal. Yeah, sounds great.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you everybody for listening. Again, follow us on Twitter. That's the best place to interact with us, or the Discord channel, the Pre-Order Bonus Podcast Discord channel. Link in the description if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, you can find it in the podcast description of the episode. Thank you everybody for listening, and have a fantastic night.